The 13th floor of Stratos Global Capital was a world of steel, glass, and silence.
The conference room at the north wing overlooked Manhattan's shimmering skyline, where corporate giants planned futures worth billions. Inside, 12 senior executives sat in leather-backed chairs, poised around a marble table so polished it reflected every flicker of tension in the room. At the head of the table sat Richard Sterling, chairman and CEO. A man molded by discipline, honed by profit margins, and feared as much for his intuition as for his power. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so sharply it might cut glass. His voice, low and precise, echoed as he wrapped up a presentation that forecasted another record-breaking quarter.
No one dared interrupt Richard Sterling, ever.
Not his board, not the media, and certainly not the silence. Until now.
The glass doors to the conference room burst open.
All heads snapped toward the entrance. A boy stood there, soaked from the rain, his shaggy brown hair plastered to his forehead, his cheeks flushed from running. He couldn't have been more than 13. A beaten canvas backpack hung from his shoulders, one strap torn, as if it had seen too many long walks and not enough rest. A moment of frozen disbelief passed.
Then murmure.
The security team, caught off guard, sprang to their feet. But before they could reach him, the boy raised his voice, clear and steady despite the tremble in his chest.
I'm looking for Richard Sterling.
Richard turned, slowly. His gaze was unreadable, but something in his jaw shifted, almost imperceptibly. I am Richard Sterling, he said. Who are you, and how did you get past security?
The boy stepped forward, drawing curious, skeptical stare from every corner of the room.
He spoke, his eyes locked on the man he had traveled across the city to find. My name is Eli Grant, he said.
And, you're my father.
The room fell silent. One of the senior VPs let out a scoff, quickly stifled. Another reached for their tablet, pretending to check an email that didn't exist. The security guards paused, unsure of whether to drag the boy out or wait for a signal. Sterling didn't move. I don't know who you are, he said flatly. But this is not the place or time for whatever stunt this is. Eli's hands fumbled at the zipper of his backpack. I'm not making this up. I have proof. My mother, her name was Hannah Grant.
The name hit Richard like a silent tremor.
He didn't show it, but his eyes flickered for half a breath. Eli pulled out an old photograph. The corners were curled, the color faded, but it showed a young Richard Sterling in his early 20s, arm wrapped around a smiling woman in a white blouse, Hannah. Between them, a baby boy no more than a year old. The photo trembled slightly in Eli's hands as he held it up for everyone to see. That's you, he said, that's my mom. And that's me. Richard's gaze dropped to the image, but he didn't reach for it. My mother died last year, Eli added, quieter. Before she passed, she told me to find you. She said, you never knew the truth. That everything you were told was a lie. One of the executives whispered something under his breath. Another chuckled, half disbelieving, half nervous. Richard remained still. What do you want? He asked finally. Eli's voice cracked, but he didn't waver. I want you to take a DNA test. I have a sample, mine. A real one.
No more mistake. No more lies. Just the truth.
From his pocket, he produced a small sealed vial, an official testing tube with a red cap. He walked forward and placed it gently on the table. Let the blood speak, he said.
If I'm wrong, you'll never see me again.
A heavy silence blanketed the room. Richard looked down at the vial as if it were something foreign and dangerous. He didn't pick it up. Behind him, on the screen still glowing from the presentation, projected numbers danced in the shadow of this new reality. Growth curves, revenue margins, all temporarily meaningless. One of the security officers asked quietly, Sir, should I escort him out? Richard glanced at the boy again, at the wet sneakers, the determined eyes that looked so strangely familiar. A flash of something long buried twisted inside him. No, he said slowly. Let him be. Eli seemed surprised, even hopeful for a brief second. But Richard's next words were cold. This changes nothing unless it's proven.
Take your vial.
Leave it with reception. My legal team will be in touch. But, Eli began.
Richard's eyes hardened.
Now. The boy flinched, then nodded. He placed the vial more firmly on the table, took one last glance at the man he believed was his father, and turned to leave. As he walked away, his shoulders trembled, but not from the cold. Outside, the rain poured harder, blurring the skyline beyond the glass like a city trying to erase its own reflection. Inside the boardroom, silence returned. But nothing was the same. Because somewhere in that silence, Richard Sterling was no longer just a billionaire. He was, for the first time in years, a man haunted by a name he thought he'd buried.
Anna Grant.
And a boy's voice, young, defiant, unshakably certain, still echoed in the back of his mind.
Let the blood speak.
The following evening, long after the last executive had left and the building's janitorial staff had begun their slow, silent procession through the hallways, Richard Sterling sat alone in his office. His hands were still. His mind was not. The photo lay on the polished surface of his desk, angled just slightly beneath the glow of the desk lamp. He hadn't touched it since the boy left. But he hadn't looked away from it either. The moment Richard had seen that photograph, the world had cracked, just a little. He had forgotten how young he once was. Back then, he was no CEO. Just another poor student with big ideas, living off ramen noodles and midnight shifts at a bookstore. And Hannah Grant, she wasn't just another girl. She had been the one constant in a world that refused to stay still. He remembered her laughter, sharp and musical, how she once told him, "You'll own the sky someday. Just don't forget the ground you came from." And she believed in him. More than anyone. More than he believed in himself. Then one day, she vanished. No warning. No phone call. Only a neatly folded letter left outside his door, accompanied by a single sheet of paper, a paternity test, allegedly confirming that the child she was carrying wasn't his. He never questioned it. He had been angry, betrayed, and too focused on climbing the ladder to stop and look back. Until now. Now a boy had walked into his boardroom, held up a photo like a mirror, and everything Richard had built suddenly felt precarious. He leaned back in his chair and opened the drawer beside him. Inside was an old battered folder labeled Personal, Hannah G. He had kept it. Somehow. The folder held faded notes, old printed photos, receipts from their favorite cafe near Columbia University, and the letter she had left him. He unfolded it carefully, the creases worn and fragile.
Richard.
I know you'll hate me for this.
Meb forever.
But this is the only way I can protect what's left of us. This isn't your child.
You don't owe me anything.
Move on. Be the man I know you can be.
Don't look back.
Hannah. He read it again. And again. Each time, it made less sense. What was she protecting him from? And why, after all these years, would her son, if he really was her son, insist on the truth being different? Richard reached for his phone and dialed a private number. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered.
This is Dr. Eleanor Parks.
Dr. Parks.
It's Richard Sterling.
A pause.
Monsieur Sterling. This is unexpected.
I need a DNA test, he said plainly.
Confidential. No intermediary.
I'll send a sample, my hair. You'll receive a second vial by courier. The subject is a minor. Do not use my company's resources. No names. Just the samples.
Eleanor hesitated.
Is this personal or? It's personal, he said. Then added, but it may become much more. She didn't ask further. After he ended the call, Richard carefully enclosed several strands of his hair in a sealed envelope and handwrote a code word for identification. The boy's sample, the red-capped vial, had been transferred to his office from reception earlier that afternoon. He stared at it now, resting on his desk like a challenge. Across town, in a modest walk-up apartment in the Bronx, Eli Grant sat cross-legged on his mattress, headphones on, the small voice recorder clutched tightly in his hand. It was his mother's voice. Clear. Steady. Slightly hoarse from chemo. Eli, if you're listening to this. I'm probably gone. And I'm sorry.
You wanted more time.
I wanted to see you graduate.
See you log. See you fall in love.
But life doesn't ask us what we want, does it?
You're stronger than you know.
And smarter than I ever was.
You'll feel angry, and lost. You'll question everything.
Even me. Especially me. A pause. But one thing I ask of you, don't stop looking.
Don't stop asking.
I tried to protect you. I really did. But there are things I couldn't fight alone. So I've left you the tools to find the truth. Whether you're ready or not, it's yours now. Go find him. And let the truth speak for itself. Eli's eyes burned. He blinked rapidly. The USB drive lay on the floor next to him, half wrapped in an old cloth. Inside it were dozens of files. Medical records, financial documents, court papers, email screenshots. Things he didn't fully understand yet, but he would. He had to. The truth wasn't just about DNA. It was about what had happened to his mother. And why. Back in Manhattan, Nathan Cole stood in his penthouse office at the west side of the building. Lights from the city flickered across his face as he sipped scotch and scrolled through a private security feed on his tablet. He had seen the footage. He knew about the boy. His jaw tightened. Of all the things that could unravel his years of careful engineering, it had to be the child. He remembered Hannah too.
Fartuelle.
And what she had threatened to reveal. He made a quick call. Get me a copy of the courier manifests from Sterling's office, he said. Anything flagged under private delivery in the last 24 hours. I don't care how you do it. Then after a beat he added coldly, and find the boy. Quietly. He ended the call and set the glass down. This wasn't about a child. This was about control. And Richard Sterling was about to remember just how easily the truth could be buried, again. Eli Grant woke up before dawn, the gray light of the city creeping through the broken blinds of his bedroom. The small apartment was still, filled with the kind of silence that only comes when the world is too tired to make noise. He sat up on the edge of the mattress, rubbing his eyes and glancing at the cluttered nightstand beside him. His fingers found the voice recorder first. He pressed play. His mother's voice drifted into the room again, like a ghost refusing to let go. You won't understand everything right away, she said, and that's okay. I didn't either. What matters is that you keep going.
The truth won't take knock twice.
Eli closed his eyes. He had listened to the same recording nearly a dozen times since leaving Stratos Tower. But somehow, it hit different each morning. Colder. Closer. He pulled on a faded hoodie, laced his sneakers, and checked the USB drive again. Still safe. Taped beneath the desk drawer, inside an envelope marked with his mother's handwriting. He hadn't yet gone through every file. Many of them were encrypted, and some simply too dense for him to grasp. But what he had seen, partial ownership contracts, medical summaries with redacted names, and notes Hannah had scribbled in the margins, pointed to something larger than abandonment. It wasn't that Richard had chosen to leave. It was that something or someone had made him believe it was necessary. Eli didn't yet know what the full story was. But he knew where to start looking. And that meant returning to Stratos Tower. By 7:30, the building was already alive with movement. People in suits strode through the lobby, their conversations sharp and coded, their shoes tapping against the polished floors like clockwork. Eli didn't try to sneak in this time. Instead, he walked in calmly and approached the reception desk. The security guard behind the glass frowned when he saw the boy, then reached for a phone. I'm not here to cause trouble, Eli said quickly.
I just want to speak to Monsieur Sterling again.
He said his legal team would be in touch. You can't just walk in here, kid. I left a DNA sample. Ask him. The guard narrowed his eyes, clearly debating how much trouble this would be. Before he could respond, another voice interrupted from behind.
Il take it from here.
A tall woman in a dark green pantsuit approached. She had sharp cheekbones, no-nonsense posture, and an ID clipped to her jacket, Rachel Moore, Investigative Media Group.
Eli blinked.
He didn't know her. Not really. But the name had come up in one of his mother's files, a reporter Hannah had once worked with during a brief medical whistleblower case. There was a note next to the name, if anything happens, trust her. Rachel offered him a small smile, then turned to the guard. He's with me. We have a meeting scheduled on the 12th floor. The guard looked skeptical but didn't argue. A few taps later, the elevator doors slid open, and they stepped inside. Once the doors closed, Rachel spoke quietly. I wasn't expecting to see you here. You know who I am? Eli asked. I know who your mother was. She reached out to me a few times years ago.
Smart woman.
Determined. She wanted to go public with something. Then she went silent. Eli stared at her. Do you think she was silenced? I think she was scared, Rachel said. And she had reason to be. They stepped out onto the 12th floor, into a smaller, quieter section of the tower. It was a mix of shared offices and private consultation rooms. Rachel led him into one. Start from the beginning, she said, sitting across from him.
Tell me what you know.
Eli took a deep breath and opened his backpack. He pulled out the USB drive and the photograph. The same one he had shown Richard Sterling. He explained everything, his mother's illness, her warnings, the voice recordings, the documents, the visit to the boardroom. Rachel listened without interruption, only taking notes sparingly. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair.
I believe you.
But belief isn't enough. We need proof.
Vérifiable, hard évidence.
I have some of it on here, Eli said, handing her the USB. I'll need to copy this and get my team on the encrypted files, she said. But you need to be careful. You're not just poking at a powerful man's legacy. You're stepping into a web of people who have more to lose than you can imagine. I don't care, Eli said. My mom died alone thinking the truth didn't matter. I'm not letting that happen again. Rachel nodded slowly. Then let's start with something small. Do you know if Richard Sterling took your DNA seriously? He said his legal team would be in touch. That was it. Rachel considered. If he's having tests done off the books, it might take a few days. But someone in this building will know. And I have a few sources. She stood. Wait here. I'll make some calls. When she left, Eli wandered the room, restless. A small window overlooked the east side of the city. Far in the distance, the spire of the Empire State Building poked above the rooftops like a silent sentinel. Eli had never felt smaller. And yet, somehow, he also felt more dangerous. Back in the upper floors, Richard Sterling sat at his desk as a courier arrived with an envelope from Dr. Eleanor Park's private lab. He broke the seal and pulled out a single page. Test, pending, full results expected within 48 hours. He exhaled, folded the letter, and placed it in a drawer. His mind drifted again. To Hannah. To the night she left. To the possibility that every decision he had made in the last 13 years had been based on a lie. Meanwhile, on the executive level, Nathan Cole was already ahead of him. He had intercepted the courier logs. He knew which lab Richard was using. And he had people in place. He stood at the far end of a glass-paneled office, overlooking the city, phone pressed to his ear. Make sure that test never sees the light of day, he said calmly.
And keep eyes on the boy.
He's getting help. He ended the call and stared at his own reflection in the glass. Behind him, the past was catching up. But Nathan had no intention of letting it win. The concrete walls of Stratos Tower's underground parking garage echoed with a steady drip of water from a broken pipe somewhere overhead. It was just past 9 p.m., and most employees had long since cleared out. The garage was nearly empty, silent, still, cold. Eli stood near the far corner, behind a line of thick pillars that blocked him from the security cameras. He clutched his backpack tightly to his chest, eyes darting toward every sound. A car door slamming 3 levels above, the distant hiss of a freight elevator, his own heartbeat. He didn't know who had sent the message. The words had been simple. Want the truth about your mom?
Garage level, Stratos Tower.
7 p.m. He had waited for 2 hours. He was starting to wonder if it had been a trap. Then from the shadows, a man stepped into view. He wore a dark overcoat, the collar turned up against the cold, and a gray beanie pulled low over his forehead. His face was unshaven, eyes sharp but tired. He moved like someone who didn't want to be seen but knew exactly where all the cameras were. You're Eli, the man said quietly, stopping 6 feet away. Eli didn't respond. The man reached into his pocket, slowly, and held up a phone. On the screen was a photo of Eli with his mother Hannah. It was the same one Eli carried, but older. A scan. A copy someone had saved.
Ik knew your mother, the man said.
Long time ago.
She trusted me.
She asked me to protect you if anything happened. Eli's fists clenched.
Why should he believe you?
Because I'm the one who told her not to trust Nathan Cole. That name sent a jolt through Eli. You knew Cole? He asked. I worked under him.
Compliance division.
I saw what he buried. What he forged. What he threatened her with. I told her to walk away. But she didn't. She said her son deserved the truth. The man stepped closer, his voice now low and fast. That paternity test?
The one she left for Richard?
It was fake. Cole swapped it before it ever reached her hands. Your mother never even saw the real results. Eli swallowed hard, the ground beneath him suddenly unstable. Why? Because if Richard knew you were his, Hannah would have had leverage. Half the board owed her for a cancer research project she exposed years ago. And Richard would have changed the company's succession plans. The man paused. And Cole, he had his own plans. Eli looked at him, searching for cracks in the story. Why now? Why are you helping me?
Because your mother trusted me once.
And I didn't do enough to protect her. This is me trying to fix that. He pulled a small envelope from his coat and handed it to Eli. Inside is a name.
Dr. Eleanor Parks.
She's the lab Richard used for the new test. If you can verify the sample reached her untouched, you might finally have something concrete. Eli opened the envelope. Inside was a post-it with the lab's address and a list of initials, sample codes. He looked up, but the man was already turning to leave. Wait, what happened to her? Eli asked. My mom. Did Cole? The man stopped but didn't turn around. She died of something real, he said. But I don't believe it was natural.
Not anymore.
Then he walked into the darkness and disappeared. Eli stood alone again, gripping the envelope like a lifeline. Back in her small apartment across town, Rachel Moore was already working. She had spent the last 3 hours pulling digital records from public filings, internal whistleblower reports, and financial disclosures connected to Stratos Global. The deeper she went, the stranger the patterns became. Shell corporations tied to private research. Medical patents registered in Hannah Grant's name, then reassigned 6 months before her death. Internal memos where entire teams were restructured days after raising safety concerns. And in the center of it all, Nathan Cole. Rachel leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. She was piecing together a picture, and it didn't look like corporate negligence. It looked like a cover-up. Her phone buzzed.
Ellie.
I need to find someone, he said without preamble. Her name is Dr. Eleanor Parks.
She's the one running the test.
I think Cole might be trying to interfere. Rachel was already searching the name. Got her. Independent biogenetics lab. Low profile. But she's clean. No links to Cole. I need to know if she got the right sample.
No substitution.
I'll call in a favor, Rachel said. Stay put. Or better yet, come here. I can't, Eli said. Someone's following me. Rachel's voice hardened.
Then tell me where you are. I'll come to you.
Eli hesitated. Then gave her the address of a public library a few blocks away. I'll be there in 20, Rachel said. But someone else was already watching. From across the street, behind the tinted window of a black sedan, a man in a suit lowered a pair of binoculars and picked up his phone. Target just left the tower.
Et me sommeon in the garage.
We don't have ID yet. Follow the kid, said the voice on the other end. Don't lose him. In his penthouse, Nathan Cole sat in silence. The office lights were off. The only illumination came from the monitors on his desk, security feeds, courier logs, encrypted emails. He watched as a notification popped up. Lab contact confirmed. Parks Lab has received both samples. Processing underway.
Too late to stop the lab now.
But not too late to silence everything else. He picked up the phone again. Get someone inside Parks Lab. I want results delayed, corrupted, lost, I don't care how. Just make sure Sterling doesn't see them.
And the boy.
There was a pause. Then coldly, he's just a kid. But sometimes, the wrong kid ruins everything. The line went dead. In a city of millions, a man was trying to erase a story. And a boy was risking everything to tell it.
The sky above, a city bled into a deep, unbroken grey.
Rain slanted through the streets of the Bronx, relentless and cold, soaking into cracked sidewalks and the shoulders of passers-by who no longer looked up. Eli Grant sat on the stone steps outside the Kingsbridge Public Library, his backpack pulled close, his hood up, jeans clinging to his legs from the wet. He'd been waiting for nearly an hour.
Rachel Moore Adentécom.
He kept checking the street. Every approaching headlight raised his hopes before crushing them again. His phone had died 30 minutes ago. No way to call. No way to check if something had gone wrong. Or worse, if someone had gotten to her too. His breath came in slow, steady clouds. Around him, the city moved on, indifferent. His fingers curled around the small recorder in his jacket pocket, thumb grazing the worn play button. He didn't press it. Not yet. He had been holding on to hope with both hands for days. First when he walked into that boardroom. Then when Rachel promised to help. Then when the man in the garage gave him the envelope with Dr. Park's name. But now the hope was thinning. Every corner of the city seemed to whisper, "You're just a kid.
No one is coming. Give it up."
He had no more names.
No more backup.
Just questions and the sense that, somewhere deep in the system, a machine had already started crushing the truth before it could take shape. The rain blurred his vision as much as his thoughts. He pulled the recorder out again, this time pressing play. The voice that answered was soft, familiar, and far too alive for someone who was gone. "I didn't leave you answers, Eli," his mother said.
"He left you clues.
"You'll have to make sense of them yourself. That's the hard part. But you're good at hard things. You always have been." He hunched forward, burying his face into the crook of his elbow.
Tears came quietly.
Not in sobs or gasps, just slow and steady like the rain. "I wish I could have given you a normal life," Hannah's voice continued. "A home. A yard. Weekends. But I gave you what I had, the truth, buried under fear. I tried to fight. I really did." Her voice cracked slightly. "But sometimes, Eli, the strongest thing you can do is survive long enough for someone else to finish the fight." Eli looked up, blinking through the water on his lashes. He didn't feel strong. Not at all. But then a new voice interrupted the rain. "Hey." Eli flinched, his hand darting into his backpack for the pepper spray Rachel had given him. "Easy," the voice said.
"I'm not here to hurt you." A man stepped into the flickering light of the street lamp.
Tall, heavy coat, military boots. His beard was wild, his hair tucked under a knit cap. He looked like a dozen other people Eli had passed on the street without seeing. "Name's Joe," he said. "You were at Stratos Tower earlier this week. I sleep near the service entrance. Saw you go in."
"Saw you come out."
Eli didn't respond. Joe crouched, lowering his voice. "I knew your mom. Hannah. Not well. But she used to bring food to the shelter on Sundays. Didn't talk much, but when she did, she talked about you."
"You knew her?"
Eli asked, voice hoarse. Joe nodded. "Said you were the reason she kept fighting." Eli hesitated, then sat up straighter.
Joe glanced around.
"It's not safe out here."
"Not tonight. Come with me."
"I got a dry place. Not fancy, but it's warm. You can charge your phone, clean up. You'll think better on a full stomach." Eli wanted to say no. He wanted to be suspicious. But something in Joe's eyes, something quiet and heavy with knowing, made him stand. They walked in silence for 10 minutes through winding alleyways and beneath rusted fire escapes. Finally, Joe led him through the broken back door of an abandoned church. Inside, a few makeshift beds lined the walls. A portable heater buzzed faintly in the corner. Joe pointed to a dry blanket.
"Sit. I'll make you something."
15 minutes later, Eli was sipping canned soup and watching his phone blink back to life, battery crawling from the dead. No messages. No missed calls. But Rachel's contact was still saved. "I think they got to her," Eli muttered. Joe sat on the floor nearby, legs stretched out, warming his hands over a tin mug. "Maybe. Or maybe she's just caught in something bigger than both of you." Eli looked up.
"You think this is bigger than coal?"
Joe didn't answer right away. Power like his doesn't exist in a vacuum. Men like Cole, they're connected to people with more money, more silence, more fear. You shake their world, they shake back. Eli's stomach clenched. Then what's the point? Joe leaned forward. "The point is, you're still here. And so is the truth. That means you're still dangerous." He gestured toward the recorder. I bet your mom knew that. Eli nodded, the weight of everything settling again. I don't know what to do next, he said quietly. Joe smiled, but it was a sad smile. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't come with instructions. Just people willing to carry it. Later that night, after Joe had fallen asleep, Eli stood near the cracked stained glass window at the front of the church. The city stretched out before him, so wide, so fast, so impossible. He took out the recorder one more time and whispered into it. I don't know how this ends, Mom. But I'm not done. Then he turned and walked back to the blanket, pulled it over his shoulders, and let the weight of the night sink into his bones. Outside, the rain began to ease. And somewhere in the city, a lab technician was holding 2 DNA samples in her hands, unaware that their results could either open a door or end a war. Morning broke slowly, with a pale sun rising over a city that never truly slept. Eli stood outside the abandoned church with his hands in his pockets, staring toward the street where buses roared past and people hurried through their routines as if the world weren't quietly unraveling just beneath their feet. Joe had left early, offering no destination, just a gruff promise, you'll know if you need me again. Eli appreciated that. Some people didn't need long goodbyes. With his phone fully charged and a cup of instant coffee warming his hands, Eli opened the voice recorder and played the last message his mother had left. Inside the thumb drive, there's a file labeled Echo. I wasn't sure I'd ever give it to you. It's not for the courts or the press.
It's for you.
If I don't get to explain what happened, it will. Eli pulled the USB drive from his backpack, heart pounding. Until now, he'd only skimmed through its contents, fragmented files, encrypted folders, and documents he didn't fully understand. But this was different. He found a computer in the back of a rundown community center library, an old desktop tucked in the corner behind a flickering fluorescent light. He slipped the drive into the port and opened the folder labeled Echo. There it was, a video file. Just over 10 minutes long. He clicked play. The screen flickered, then cleared to show his mother sitting in a dimly lit room, framed by lamplight and the soft rustle of paper. Her face was thinner than he remembered. The scarf wrapped around her head betrayed the chemo treatments. But her eyes were steady, calm. If you're watching this, she began, then either I'm gone, or I've lost the chance to explain this to you myself. I didn't want it this way. I tried so hard not to involve you. She paused, looking down for a second, then back at the camera. You've probably learned by now that Nathan Cole isn't just some executive. He's smart, dangerous, and worse, untouchable in the traditional sense. Years ago, I came across internal reports suggesting fraudulent clinical trials involving Stratos-funded research. I confronted them. Quietly. At first, I thought I was being heard. But then the reports disappeared. My access was revoked. People I worked with were reassigned. One was found dead in what they called a hiking accident. I kept digging. That's when I found the files in this drive. She looked to the side and held up a printed copy of a contract. This is a transfer agreement for shares I never agreed to sell. It's dated 3 days after I was hospitalized. There's a forged signature here, mine. Not even a good one. She dropped the page to her lap.
And Richard. Richard never knew.
He thinks I left him.
That elite.
But I was threatened. Not just with my job or my name, but with you.
Her voice cracked.
They told me that if I didn't walk away, if I didn't vanish from his life, you'd suffer for it. They said it would be an accident. That no one would even suspect. And I believed them. She wiped her cheek but didn't look away. So I ran.
Il reste Dieu alone.
I let him think he didn't matter, because it was the only way to keep you safe. Eli leaned in, every nerve in his body taut. There's a file in the archive folder, labeled Testimony. It contains notes, emails, and recordings I gathered over the years. It names people, dates, places. It won't be admissible in court on its own. But it's a map. And you're smart enough to follow it. The screen flickered slightly as she leaned forward. I don't want you to become obsessed with revenge. That's what they want.
Angry people burn fast and disappear.
But the truth, if you carry it right, it can't be silenced. Her voice softened. I'm proud of you. No matter how this ends. And I love you more than anything I ever had to give up. She reached forward, as if to touch the camera, and the video ended.
Ellie sat frozen.
He didn't cry. He couldn't. Instead, he opened the archive folder. Inside were PDFs of internal communications between Stratos global executives, contracts with forged annotations, voice memos from unnamed sources, and copies of board meeting minutes, many with redacted names. There were also 2 folders labeled Nathan Cole, Direct, and R. Sterling, History. He opened the one with his father's name first. The documents painted a different picture of Richard Sterling, not the cold, polished CEO from the boardroom, but a man who had fought to protect patient rights during Stratos' early clinical phases. Memos with notes in the margins: do not let Cole run unsupervised, and ethics must remain intact, even if profits take a hit. At some point, Richard had stopped writing those notes. The trail ended abruptly.
Ellie leaned back.
His mother had trusted Sterling once. Maybe, she still had. He copied everything to a secure cloud folder, encrypted it, and sent a link to Rachel Moore's private inbox. Then he packed up and left the library. Across the city, in a quiet office at Park's biogenetics lab, Dr. Eleanor Parks leaned over 2 vials. The samples had arrived sealed, uncorrupted. She had delayed running them once, under pressure from a man she didn't know, an anonymous threat warning her to lose the samples or lose your license. But something about the message had triggered her stubbornness rather than fear. So she ignored it. Now the sequencing was complete. Her eyes scanned the report. A perfect 99.98% match between the 2 DNA profiles.
Richard Sterling and Ellie Grant. Father and son.
She stared at the screen, knowing full well what this meant, not just to the boy, but to the empire Sterling had built. She picked up the phone and called the number Richard had given her. Straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Not yet. First, she would print the report, seal it, and hand-deliver it herself. But she wouldn't be the only one moving that day. Nathan Cole sat in his private suite, staring at a digital alert from one of his informants inside Park's lab. Test completed. Result: confirmed paternity. His jaw clenched. He closed the message and typed out a reply.
Understood. Time to act.
Then he made one final call. It's done, he said.
Move forward. We're out of time.
Outside, the city kept spinning. But deep within its core, lines were being drawn. Because now, the truth wasn't just possible. It was undeniable. And someone was going to pay for it. Richard Sterling stared out the window of his corner office, watching the morning light reflect off the steel and glass towers of Midtown Manhattan. The city was awake now, loud, relentless, and filled with movement. But in his office, there was stillness.
Too much stillness.
In his hand was a sealed envelope, the kind that usually brought contracts or threats. But this one had come from Dr. Eleanor Parks, delivered personally and without fanfare. No assistant had touched it. No courier had logged it. It now sat open on his desk, the contents spread like an accusation. He had read the DNA results twice.
À 99.98% match.
Eli Grant was his son. Biologically. Undeniably. He exhaled long and slow, as if releasing years of certainty that had just crumbled into ash. The lies, the silence, the manipulated test Hannah had given him 13 years ago, it had all been engineered. Someone had wanted him to believe the boy wasn't his. Someone had made sure he never looked back. And now, for the first time in years, he knew who. Richard buzzed his assistant.
Cancel all my meeting today.
Yes, sir. All of them. Yes. And get me access to the private audit logs from 2010 to 2012. Restricted files. Use my clearance. No one else's. There was a pause on the line.
Understood.
He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Parks Lab, the receptionist answered. Dr. Parks, please. She's not in the building. She said she'd be unreachable until this afternoon. Richard narrowed his eyes. When she returns, tell her I received her file. Thank her. He hung up. For a moment, he sat in silence, running names through his mind. Legal teams. Compliance officers. Shareholder conflicts. Board members with agendas. But only one name kept rising to the surface.
Nathan Cole.
A man he had once trusted like a brother. He left the office without a word to anyone and headed up to the executive floor, where Cole kept his suite. No appointments, no emails. Just the sound of leather soles striking marble as he made his way down the hallway. Nathan was alone, standing at his desk, reading something on his screen when Richard entered. He didn't look surprised to see him. "Richard," Nathan said smoothly, not bothering to feign confusion. "To what do I owe the honor?" Richard shut the door behind him and walked forward, placing the DNA report on Nathan's desk without a word. Nathan glanced at it. "Ah, that's all you have to say?" Richard asked, voice low. Nathan leaned back slightly. "I imagine there's a more theatrical way to handle this, but we're both grown men.
You got your test.
That should be the end of it."
Richard sighs narrowed. The end of it.
"I mean, what are you going to do, Richard? Drag this into the media? Announce to the board that you fathered a child out of wedlock 13 years ago and let your enemies use it against you? You think they'll see a victim? They'll see weakness. Liability." "I can handle that," Richard said. "What I can't handle is the idea that you forged a paternity test and let Hannah disappear."
That you let me believe she lied.
Nathan's expression tightened. "She was a threat to this company. She was the mother of my child." "She was a whistleblower," Nathan snapped. "She had evidence that could have crippled us, real documentation from clinical trials gone wrong, a record of patients injured or dying before protocols were finalized. She was planning to go public. I stopped her, for all of us." "You silenced her," Richard said. "I gave you a future," Nathan countered. "Do you think you'd be standing here now, on top of a billion-dollar empire, if that story had gone out? If the media had torn us apart? If lawsuits had buried us? You would have been just another failed idealist." "You had no right," Richard said, voice rising. Nathan stepped around the desk. "You gave me that right the moment you stopped asking questions, Richard. You looked away. You let yourself believe the lie because it was easier than dealing with the truth." Richard's fists clenched. "She died, Nathan." Nathan's face flickered, something between regret and fatigue. "I didn't kill her. Cancer did. But you made sure she died alone. And you let a boy grow up without knowing who he was." Nathan didn't answer. Richard turned to the window, trying to collect himself. The skyline no longer looked like triumph. It looked like distance, between what he had built and what he had lost. "You're stepping down," Richard said. Nathan arched an eyebrow. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," Richard replied. "You'll announce your resignation by the end of the week. Medical reasons, family emergency, I don't care."
But your gun.
"And if I don't?" Nathan asked. Richard pulled out a flash drive and dropped it onto the desk beside the DNA report. "That contains every document your people buried, every forged signature Hannah uncovered, and the full sequence of our compliance audit that was never published. I've already sent copies to the board and to a journalist named Rachel Moore." Nathan looked at the drive, but didn't touch it. "You're bluffing," he said, voice low. "Try me." They stared at each other, two men who had once stood on the same side of an empire, now facing each other like soldiers on opposite lines of a battlefield. Finally, Nathan stepped back.
You've changed.
"No," Richard said quietly. "I just remembered who I was supposed to be." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Oh, and if anything happens to Eli Grant, to Rachel Moore or to Dr. Parks, I will make sure this company burns."
You won't just lose your job. You lose your legacy.
Then he walked out.
Nathan stood alone in the office, staring at the drive.
Outside, the city continued without pause, unaware that a silent war had just begun. And in the distance, in a quiet apartment lit by a single lamp, Eli read an email from Rachel Moore. "I've reviewed the files you sent. They're real. They're dangerous. And they might be exactly what we need to bring this all down." Eli looked out the window, toward the skyline where his father's tower loomed. He didn't know how this would end. But he knew, finally, that someone was standing beside him. The concourse at JFK International Airport was buzzing with the familiar chaos of early evening departures. People moved with purpose, dragging rolling suitcases, clutching passports, checking monitors.
Outside, a cold wind stirred the flags above the terminal, grey clouds pressing low over the city like a warning.
Inside gate 42B, a man in a tailored overcoat stood near the window, sunglasses pulled low, collar up. Nathan Cole didn't look like someone fleeing. He looked like someone in control. Calm. Composed. But the way he gripped his phone told a different story. His flight to Zurich would begin boarding in 20 minutes. A private jet would be waiting at the far end of a quiet Swiss airstrip by morning.
New identity.
New life.
New immunity.
He had made the calls. Frozen accounts. Wiped records. Paid off the necessary hands. By the time the fallout from the DNA results and leaked documents hit, he would be sipping scotch in a quiet villa above Lake Geneva. Except Richard hadn't stayed quiet. Eli hadn't backed down. And Rachel Moore had gone public. Just an hour ago, her first article had dropped. The headline had been simple.
The boy in the boardroom, a Billionaire, a corporate cover-up, and a COS silent war.
It hadn't named names yet. But it wouldn't be long. The comments section was already a battlefield. His name was trending. He turned from the window and made his way toward the boarding gate. That was when he noticed them. Two men in plain clothes, moving just a bit too quickly. Eyes sharp.
Shoulders squared.
He turned calmly and stepped into a crowd, weaving through a group of college students near the food court. His pace didn't change, but his direction did. He headed for a side corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only, and swiped a card he wasn't supposed to have anymore.
The door clicked open.
He disappeared inside. Half a terminal away, Richard Sterling was moving just as fast. He wasn't alone. Eli was beside him, breathless but determined, clutching a copy of the test results in one hand and a folder of evidence in the other. Rachel followed behind, phone to her ear, coordinating with a federal contact who had agreed to meet them at the terminal. "He's trying to run," Rachel said. "He had a private charter set up in Zurich. That's how he's going to move money out, through shell trusts." "They'll never let him board," Richard said. "They might not have a choice if he clears security," Rachel replied. Eli turned to Richard. "Are you sure you want to be here for this?" Richard looked at him. "I wasn't there 13 years ago."
I'm here now.
They pushed through the security checkpoint, flashing emergency clearance given to them by a U.S. Marshal stationed nearby. A second later, Richard was speaking with the gate agent. "Nathan Cole," he said. "Passenger on Flight 893 to Zurich. He's not to board." The agent hesitated. "Sir, that would require—" "Just stall him," Rachel interrupted. "You don't want to be the one who let a federal investigation target walk." The agent nodded, nervously tapping into the system. But Nathan wasn't at the gate. He had slipped behind the scenes. In the back corridors of the airport, Nathan moved fast, cutting through employee-only passages, using a secondary badge to reach a restricted door that opened onto the tarmac. A black SUV waited just beyond the fence, another backup plan. He was almost there. Almost free. Then a voice echoed from behind.
Don't take another step.
Nathan turned. Richard stood at the far end of the corridor, flanked by two security officers and Eli, who stood slightly behind, but tall, steady, unflinching.
Nathan S. Fassardend.
"You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be running," Richard said.
Nathan looked bitterly.
"You think this is over because you have a DNA test and a news article? Do you know how many people I protected by burying what she found? Do you have any idea how deep this goes?" "I don't care how deep it goes," Richard replied.
We start with you.
Eli stepped forward, holding up the folder.
You erased my life. Lied about my mother.
You let her die thinking the truth would never matter. She made her choices, Nathan said coldly. No, Eli said. You made them for her. Nathan looked at Richard. You think this makes you a hero? What are you going to do now, huh?
Take the boy in? Patch together some broken fantasy of fatherhood? You're 13 years too late.
Maybe, Richard said. But I'm here. You're not walking away from this. Maybe, Richard said. But I'm here. You're not walking away from this. Nathan raised his hand slowly, a tired smile creeping onto his face. It's already too late, Richard.
You think it ends with me?
The agents arrived seconds later, weapons holstered but hands firm as they surrounded Nathan. "You're under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Health and Human Services, and federal prosecutors for obstruction of justice, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud investors and government agencies," one of them said, reading from a small tablet. Nathan didn't resist. As the agents cuffed him and read him his rights, he looked over his shoulder at Richard.
"He protected you."
"No," Richard said.
"You protected yourself."
They took him away. For a long time, no one said anything. The corridor was quiet. Eli looked down at the folder in his hand, then up at Richard.
"What happen now?"
Richard didn't answer right away. "Now we face the rest of it," he said. "The board.
"The shareholder."
The people who stayed quiet when they should have spoken. And we let the truth do what it always does." Eli exhaled, the weight in his chest easing, just slightly. Rachel joined them, phone still pressed to her ear.
"The story is breaking wide."
3 major outlets just confirmed the documents. "It's not just Nathan anymore. This is going to pull down a lot of names." Richard nodded.
"Let it."
They walked out of the corridor together.
Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds.
And for the first time in a very long time, Eli Grant wasn't chasing the truth. He was walking beside it. The newsroom lights burned white-hot, fixed high in the rafters like watching eyes. Cameras rolled silently as producers waved hands, adjusted microphones, and whispered final cues into headsets.
Outside the studio, the world buzzed.
A story had broken, one powerful enough to shake the walls of corporate America. And now, the man at the center of it all was about to speak. Richard Sterling sat in the center chair of a televised panel interview, surrounded by a half-moon of journalists from 3 major networks. The set was minimalist, no flashing graphics or dramatic music, just white walls and neutral tones. Everything was designed to keep the focus on the man in the chair. He adjusted the knot of his tie, took a deep breath, and nodded to the anchor sitting across from him. "We're live in 5, she said. "You ready?"
Richard glanced towards the shadow just offset.
Eli stood there with Rachel Moore at his side, both watching intently.
Richard gave a small no.
Eli didn't smile, but his eyes met his father's and held there, solid, unwavering. The floor manager counted them in. Then the light on the main camera turned red. "Good evening," the anchor began. "Tonight, we bring you a story that has captured national attention and exposed one of the most consequential corporate deceptions in recent memory. With us is Richard Sterling, chairman of Stratos Global Capital, who has come forward to address the allegations and revelations involving former CEO Nathan Cole, the late Dr. Hannah Grant, and a boy who, until recently, no one in the public had ever heard of, Eli Grant." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for being here." He cleared his throat. "Thank you for having me. I want to begin with the most personal question," she said. "Do you confirm that Eli Grant is your son?" "Yes," Richard said without hesitation. "The results are conclusive. I did not know at the time. The truth was hidden from me. But I know now, and I accept it fully. Eli is my son." "And your relationship with his mother, Dr. Hannah Grant?" "We were together many years ago," Richard replied. "We were young.
In love.
We had plans. But I was led to believe, through a falsified paternity test, that the child she carried wasn't mine. That was a lie. A calculated one, orchestrated by Nathan Cole and others who feared what Hannah knew." The anchor leaned in. "What did she know, Mr. Sterling?" "Hannah uncovered unethical practices inside one of our subsidiary research firms," Richard said. "Early-phase drug trials conducted without full compliance.
Patient consent formaltaire. Safety data burier."
She tried to bring it forward. She was threatened. Silenced. And in the process, I was manipulated into turning my back on both her and our son. A beat of silence passed. Then the anchor asked, "How does a company with the size and structure of Stratos Global allow that to happen?" Richard looked into the camera. "Because we let power become a substitute for principle," he said. "Because I stopped asking hard questions.
Because he trusted the wrong people.
And because those who knew the truth feared what it would cost them to speak it." "And what will it cost you now?" "Everything it needs to," Richard replied. "Nathan Cole has been arrested. But he wasn't alone. We've initiated an internal investigation. We've released all relevant documents to the SEC and DOJ. Independent audits are underway. There will be resignations, lawsuits, maybe more. The anchor nodded. Some are saying this was more than a personal failure, that this was systemic. It was, Richard said, but systems are built by people, maintained by silence, and undone by truth. She shifted to her final questions. Eli Grant stood in your boardroom and told you he was your son. What did you feel in that moment? Richard paused. I felt time collapse, he said. I saw every choice I'd made, every boardroom decision, every business move, and realized none of it mattered if the foundation was built on a lie. I had built a legacy without knowing the most important part of it. The anchor turned slightly toward the camera. Eli is here with us in the studio. We asked him if he'd like to speak tonight, but he declined. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "This story isn't about me. It's about who chose silence and who didn't." Richard's face tightened slightly, not with regret but with pride. She continued. Last question. If you had known the truth 13 years ago, would you have done anything differently? Richard answered slowly. I can't rewrite the past, he said. But if I had known, really known, I would have fought for her.
I would protected her.
I would have raised my son with her. And maybe, just maybe, I would have remembered who I was meant to be before the world convinced me to become something else. The anchor nodded.
Thank you for your honesty, Monsieur Sterling. The red light on the camera blinked off.
The segment was done. As the crew began to shuffle around the stage, Richard stood and stepped off set. Eli waited in the wings. For a second, they just looked at each other. No press, no cameras, just father and son in a quiet moment that didn't need explanation. You didn't have to do that, Eli said. I did, Richard replied. For her. For you. For me. They walked together down the hallway toward the service elevator that would take them out the back entrance. The quiet hum of conversation followed them, but it didn't reach.
Do you know what you want to do next?
Richard asked. Eli shook his head. No. But I know what I don't want to do. I don't want to become someone who forgets. Richard nodded. As they reached the elevator, Rachel Moore was waiting. She held a phone in one hand, her eyes bright with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. The story's gone global, she said. News outlets in London, Tokyo, and Sydney just picked it up. Cole's lawyer released a statement denying everything. That'll last about 3 hours. Richard nodded.
Let it unravel.
Eli looked at her. Did you ever think we'd make it this far? Rachel smiled faintly. No. But I never bet against the truth. They stepped into the elevator. Outside, a crowd had gathered around the building, holding up signs, not in protest, but in support. Some signs read, Justice for Hannah, Truth Matters, Corporate Power is not equal to immunity. And in the middle of it all, a small cardboard sign held by a teenage girl. The boy told the truth. And we listened. The doors closed behind them. Up above, the news played on every screen. And across a nation, conversations began, not just about power and corruption, but about silence, and the cost of keeping it. The beach house sat quietly at the edge of the Atlantic, nestled among the dunes of a secluded stretch of Long Island shoreline. It was old but well-kept, whitewashed siding, a wraparound porch, and wind chimes that rang softly in the salty breeze.
The ocean stretched out endlessly red, silver and blue, calm under the weight of the early evening sky.
Richard Sterling stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting on the wooden railing, the other holding a mug of black coffee gone lukewarm. He watched the waves, though he wasn't really seeing them. His thoughts had drifted again, as they often did these days, drifting not toward the boardroom or the market, but toward memory. The house had belonged to Hannah's family once. She had brought him here during the first summer they were together, long before titles and suits, long before betrayal and silence. It had been a different world then. A different version of himself. He hadn't set foot here since the year she disappeared. Now, after everything, it was Eli who had found the deed tucked away in her files. And it was Eli who had said simply, I think we should go. So they did. From inside the house came the muffled sound of laughter, Eli's voice and Rachel's mixed with something from the old stereo. They were reviewing press coverage again, trying to track which investigations were moving forward, which settlements had been offered. Rachel had agreed to act as Eli's legal proxy until a formal trust was established. Richard had insisted on it. He was stepping away from the company. Officially, indefinitely, and without ceremony. The board had accepted his resignation 2 days after the interview aired. There was resistance from some quarters, support from others. Share prices dropped, then stabilized. Internal audits uncovered more than even he had expected. Civil suits were already in motion. Cole, still in custody, was now the centerpiece of a multi-agency investigation. The house had become a kind of limbo. A place between what was and what could still be. The screen door creaked open behind him. Eli stepped out, hands in the pockets of a gray hoodie, his sneakers silent on the wooden floorboards. He stood beside Richard without speaking. They listened to the ocean together. "You ever think it would end like this?" Eli asked quietly.
Richard shook his head.
No. I didn't even know how it began. Eli looked out toward the water. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately."
Not just the big moment. The little ones.
How she'd hum while making tea. The way she'd write on napkins when her thoughts came too fast for a notebook. "She used to do that when we were in college," Richard said. "Her napkins looked like manuscripts. She used to joke that if she died, someone would publish her grocery list as a memoir." Eli smiled faintly. "She would have liked this place." "She did," Richard said. "Once." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Eli spoke again. "I don't know if I'm supposed to forgive you." Richard turned slightly, caught off guard. Eli didn't say it with anger.
Just honesty.
"And I don't know if I'm asking you to," Richard replied. "What I did, what I didn't do, cost you something you'll never get back. I won't pretend a few weeks and a DNA test fix that." Eli nodded slowly. "But," Richard added, "I'm here now.
And I'm not leaving again.
Whatever that means for you, whether it's trust or distance or silence, I'll live with it." The wind shifted slightly, the scent of salt and seaweed drifting across the porch. After a long pause, Eli said, "You don't have to leave again. Just, don't expect me to run toward you." "I won't." They both looked out at the water again. Below the porch, the tide began to rise. The waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, brushing against the sand with gentle persistence, as if the ocean itself were erasing what had once been written too harshly on the shore. Inside the house, Rachel stepped onto the threshold, a stack of papers in her hand. "They want a final statement from Eli," she said. "For the congressional inquiry. Not testimony, just reflection. Something about the personal cost of silence." Eli turned toward her.
What should he say?
Rachel smiled.
What where's true?
He took the papers, nodded, and disappeared into one of the rooms, the door clicking gently behind him. Richard and Rachel stood together on the porch for a moment. "He's stronger than I expected," Richard said.
Rachel glanced towards the house.
"He's stronger than most people I know." A pause. "You asked me once what he wanted," she said.
The night before the interview. Il remembered.
"He didn't want money. Or revenge. He didn't even want your name." Richard looked at her. "He just wanted someone to stand with him," Rachel said. "To look the world in the eye and not look away." Richard turned his eyes back toward the sea. "I can do that," he said. They didn't speak again. The sun was beginning to lower itself toward the horizon, casting long gold streaks across the porch and the dunes beyond. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask for anything more. Inside the study, Eli sat at the desk, pen in hand, the first page of his statement blank in front of him. He stared at it for a long time. Then he wrote,
My name is Ellie Grant.
For most of my life, I didn't know where I came from. And when I found out, I realized that the truth wasn't hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it made powerful people uncomfortable. He paused, then continued. I was taught that silence is survival. But I've learned that silence is also surrender. And I've spent too long letting someone else write my story. He looked out the window, where the ocean met the sky in a long infinite line. So this is me, writing it back.